Hello and welcome to an episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. Now, today I'm not doing a review as such. What I'm actually doing is a quick little video where I want to discuss my process repairing this X-Plus Large Monster Series King Ghidorah 1968 figure. I have filmed an unboxing of this guy, however there was some technical difficulties with that, so I've been on the fence whether I should actually upload it or not. If you're watching this video, I probably would have uploaded it around the same time. So yeah, be sure to see that, because you'll see that when I actually unboxed this guy, I found out that the wing here was broken. This is kind of common with these figures, because they have these big, rigid plastic wings, and they tend to snap quite easily, and the problem was actually in the joint here. So I'm going to detail how I repaired this guy. So let me just kind of show you the finished repair. It does work really well, I gotta tell you. I don't know if this is the most professional way of doing it or anything like that, but this is just what worked for me, what I did, and I thought showing you guys might help you in the future. So, a little bit of it is still stuck in the wing. God damn it. Oh well, it'll still work though. This is made of epoxy putty. The substance is green stuff around here, and these are just nails. So I'm going to show you a little slideshow and detail my process doing this, but basically, to put in simple terms, these two pegs were completely snapped off, and one of these holes was blocked up. So I had to actually drill out the leftovers of what was in that hole, and I had to remake the pegs on this wing. I'll show you how it's meant to look on his other wing. There we go. So these are what they originally looked like, what it's meant to be, and this is just rigid plastic. Here we have the initial damaged figure. So this is just that joint in the back of Ghidorah. As you can see, the holes here are still plugged up, at least this one here. And my theory as to why the wing snapped on this guy in the first place is actually, I think the person who owned this figure before I did might have glued this joint in here, and then when they were trying to pull it out to box this guy up to then post it to me, glue didn't let them take the wing off, obviously, so they ended up snapping it, which is a bummer. Well, it's kind of hard to see in this exact photo, but in person I could see that there was a little bit of shiny glue-like substance around this joint here. But here you can just see that it was plugged up. So moving forward, we just got another angle of it there. You can see the holes blocked there, the snapped section. Here's a really blurry photo of the actual snapped edge of the wing. There we go. So that's what I had to work with. So there's no way that this wing was going to hold on in the state that it was in. So what I initially did was I got a scalpel knife, like a craft knife, and I just grazed a little section in the middle of these broken, snapped off areas where the pegs should have been. So I grazed a little section in the middle of these, just to create a little indent in about the middle of where the pegs were. And using the pin vise, which you can see a nice close-up of here, I began to start to drill a hole. Now this didn't really do much, and as you can see it's kind of off-center here, but luckily that didn't matter too much, because we ended up covering this with the epoxy putty at the end, which actually kind of means that we have a lot of wiggle room as to how the nails can actually sit. What I ended up doing was I used my Dremel tool. It's not an actual Dremel, it's just called a rotary tool from some random brand, but basically it's just a small drill. So I ended up drilling those holes a bit deeper using that. And here's just a good look at how the hole is kind of turning out. It's not very well centered, but when I did actually get the drill, I kind of centered it a little bit more, because this hole is a little bit too thin anyway. Well, basically I did the same thing on both pegs here. And luckily, this hole was the perfect width for the nails, which I ended up putting in, so they should show up soon. Yeah, there you see I got the two holes drilled. So this is the Dremel, and I'm doing the same thing in the body, except for what I'm actually doing is I'm starting off with a very thin drill, and I was just building up to a thicker and thicker drill, so that I could actually get rid of the blocked up material, or the broken off peg in that hole, and it worked pretty well. Here you can see this hole is getting wider and wider. I'm just progressively using slightly bigger drill bits and kind of just flailing it around in there, just trying to carve that bit of plastic out. One thing, if you are doing this process, that I want to advise is when you are using a drill to do this, the plastic does tend to start to heat up really quickly and start to melt onto your drill bit. It's not too difficult to clean off, but that did start to happen, and this little plastic core, which I was drilling into, basically turned into semi-molten plastic by the end, and I ended up just being able to pull it out. Here we've got the two nails plugged into the holes. Now again, I didn't drill them super deep. I think they only went in about this deep, give or take a little bit into the wing. And what I did, once I put the nails in, I was happy with how deep they sat, I glued them in. So I made sure that these drill holes weren't too wide for these nails, so they actually were pretty snug. And then I just put super glue. Maybe if I used two-part epoxy glue, it would have worked better, been a bit more stronger, but for this process I think it worked just fine. So another close-up look at the nails in the holes here. As you can see, they got a bit of glue piled around at the base of them. This is the epoxy putty that I use. So I used Epoxy Sculpt, which is a specific type of epoxy putty that's, you know, similar to Milliput or something like that, where it's designed for sculpting in detail. It's a sculpting medium. There are more industrial types of epoxy putty which cure within like 5 minutes, and they're very strong. They come in these like tubes, and you basically just break off a section of that tube and knead it all together, and that activates it. Whereas this comes in two separate tubs. Either one would work. The reason I opted to use this one, even though it was slightly more pricey, is one, I had it on hand, and two, it takes lots of hours. It takes like 3 hours to set or cure, and I wanted to be safe and make sure I had plenty of time for the epoxy putty to actually be shaped to the proper shape and then cure, because I wasn't in a rush. However, the added strength of the more industrial epoxy putty might have been beneficial in this process, but I just went with this one. Here I'm holding a bit of plastic bag. This was sort of my experimental part of this process. I decided that the way I wanted to do it was I was actually going to knead the epoxy putty together. Here you see a nice little chunk of it. So when you mix these two components together, they create this like green epoxy putty. It's like a plasticine kind of texture. There you go, you see the nice little bowl of epoxy putty. What I did is I coated the nails in this epoxy putty, and the idea is I wanted this to be able to fit seamlessly and perfectly into the joint or the hole in Ghidorah's shoulder. So I covered these with plastic. So here you just see the exposed epoxy putty, and I got some bits of plastic ready. I just cut up a bit of plastic bag, a very thin plastic bag, like a sandwich bag, nothing too fancy, and I covered them like this, sort of as loosely draped over as possible, so that when I actually squeeze them into the joint, which I've got here, when I actually pressed them in, I was kind of hoping that that would be a good barrier between the sticky epoxy putty and the inside of the joint here. Shaped the epoxy putty to be as close as I could, just eyeballing it, and then I put it in, and I left it in there for just enough time for it to take shape, which is, you know, pretty much instantaneously, and then I very, very carefully pulled it out again, and as you can see, it didn't quite go to plan. The problem is, you know, the plastic bags just didn't slide in enough. It wasn't shaped quite so perfectly, and the nails were just way too pointy and hard compared to the soft epoxy putty to actually have it all take shape how I wanted to. However, this was good enough that I actually had a rough idea of specifically what kind of a shape I'd need on the length of these, because basically I just had to repeat the actual shape that this left down the whole tip. So I just did it by hand, basically. So there you can see I didn't even tear off the plastic bag yet. I just put it over the exposed nails there, a bit more putty just to thicken it up. I didn't mind if it was a little bit extra thick anyway, because the joint would have some give to it, I'd imagine. It's better that it's a bit more snug than a little bit loose, because you can always sand it down or whatnot later on. After this, I left it for about half a day just to make sure it cured properly. This stuff, again, takes like 3 hours till it's set. And even then, the longer you leave it, the harder it'll tend to get. And there we go! I tore off the plastic off of it, and this is what we're left with. This is the repaired version. It doesn't look very elegant, does it? But functionally, should work just as well as the original one here, which you can see is just cast rigid plastic. There you go. So, yeah, it does look a bit phallic. It's a bit weird. Sorry about that, guys. It was not intentional, but unfortunately, that's just the shape it took. But for all intents and purposes, it worked. It did work. So this is me doing the first test run, actually pushing it in. Actually, one thing I will also note is this section here, where it kind of had this little breast area at the base here, I actually pushed it up a little higher when I was adding the tip on it here with more epoxy putty after the test fit, just to make sure it could really squeeze into the hole as deep as it could, because this would have stopped it going in, just to make sure the fit was really perfect. This is my first test putting it in, and ta-da! It worked phenomenally. At least until I actually pulled it out on camera at the beginning of this video. That's when it kind of fucked up again, because the tip of this one was, I guess, just not adhered as well as it could have been, so it did crumble off when I pulled it out, and the nail pulled out, and it left the bottom of this still in the joint, which is a shame, and now the wing is a little bit loose. But had I not tried to pull it out, it would have been perfect. It would have just stuck in there and been a really strong joint, so it was kind of my fault for pulling it out again, but it would have worked, and I can still fix it. I can always clean out the joint again and add more epoxy putty to the tip of this and actually leave it to set properly, and then it should work really well. So yeah, that's basically it for this little slideshow. That is how I repaired his wings, and I'm so happy that I did, because this thing just looks so majestic with both his wings. It's so much better. It's not perfect, again, like I just showed you guys. That was actually the first time I've actually pulled this thing out since I did this repair, so I kind of regret doing that, because now it is a bit loose. It wasn't like that before, so I may have to just repair that, but at the moment it's still working, so I might just leave it as is. But yeah, if you do this, I don't know if it's the 100% the best method, but it's what I used, and it seemed to work pretty well. Especially until, or rather before, I pulled it out. In fact, it was as snug, if not more, than the original wing, which was pretty good. I'm probably going to do a review of this guy sometime in the near future, because this thing is freaking awesome, and I've just had it lying around waiting for that review for the longest time, because the wings were broken, so I can finally display this thing. God knows where, because I'm really running out of space at the moment, but I love this thing. It's fantastic. So yeah, I hope this helps you guys in some way. Just always make sure that you add pins and stuff into these sort of joints, because there's a lot of, like, these wings aren't super heavy, but there's still a lot of weight and pressure on that little joint there for what it is. So adding those nails in is quite kind of important. So yeah, that is it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did, and if you want to see more content like this. So I hope to see you guys in a future video of mine, but until then, may all your vinyl be irradiated vinyl. Over and out.